courageous and strong. It's her favorite song.
Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans and you're watching the John Cedars channel from The Bunker, and in this video I need to share my belated rebuttal to the July JW Broadcasting episode, which was hosted for the first time by recently appointed governing body member Kenneth Cook. So without further ado, let's roll the first clip.
What I love most about my mom is that she has a big heart.
And I know that my dad really truly loves his family.
Our sister Sophie always takes care of you, making sure you are okay.
Our family is something that we would never want to replace. To us, it's a forever family.
So we kick off straight away with a heart-tugging personal testimony, this time by two sisters who were adopted by a Jehovah's Witness family, and straight away you can see problems. They're describing this as a forever family, where there's just so much love and nothing could replace the love they have for each other, conveniently forgetting that because they are Jehovah's Witnesses, if one member of the family were to turn their backs on the religion, were to change their minds, were to stop believing that this is God's one true religion on earth, the shunning would be immediate. And this love that cannot be replaced would be replaced very quickly by unswerving allegiance to the organization.
At a young age, I was already in the foster home, and then Mimi became my foster sister. We were not treated as part of their family.
We never knew what love felt like.
There isn't a bedroom for us.
Me and Lily would share a couch. Our foster family, they would leave us by ourselves at home, and me and Lily had to take care of ourselves. And so we were very close together because we would talk to each other and just help each other out. When we would go to school, we didn't have school supplies, so I would steal stuff. And we didn't have school uniforms. We had clothing that was dirty.
I feel like in some way that with all this experience kind of make me feel like I don't care. I didn't like authority figures and didn't really trust them.
I was lost. I was confused. I just did whatever I could possibly to protect myself.
We have experienced things that no children should go through.
And unfortunately, the hard luck story continues because they've gone from this really bad start in life, where they rightly learned to distrust authority figures, to being under the control of authority figures in a cult that micromanages lives, that demands unswerving loyalty, even to the point of requiring people to lay down their lives if a medical procedure conflicts with the teachings of the movement. So I have so much sympathy for these girls, and it's so distasteful to see the hardship they went through, which has no bearing whatsoever on the truthfulness of the organization, on the merits of becoming a Jehovah's Witness. To see these girls being exploited and their awful story being leveraged as propaganda to persuade people that only in Jehovah's organization can we find relief from the difficulties of growing up in Satan's world is really horrendous.
The first time I saw my mom and dad praying at the dinner meal, it was very new to me because I never knew that that there was a God.
I had some past experience with religion and I didn't like it. So when I first saw my mom and dad praying, I was uncomfortable with it.
They had to figure out a way to introduce their best friend, Jehovah, to us. They took us to this place called the Kingdom Hall. The first thing we felt was warmth and love.
All these friends coming up and to say hi to us, giving us hugs, just super loving towards us. A big change for me was during the 2014 International Convention. Just seeing the love and the unity between brothers and sisters touched my heart. That also helped me to progress towards making the decision of getting baptized.
Going on service more, I think it really helped me to draw closer to Jehovah and making the kingdom feel real to me. And so that's why I wanted to get baptized. And after I graduated high school, I started to pioneer. It's one way to show my love to Jehovah.
The important quality that Jehovah have taught me is love. I felt that love from my family, from Jehovah, from my friends. I learned that it's okay to love people. And that's what you're supposed to do. You love people and take care of people. And I feel like my life is more satisfying and meaningful.
When I meditate and think about what Jehovah has done for me and Lele, I don't have to be afraid. Jehovah is my secure refuge, because lives may change, but Jehovah does not change.
The love and unity of the brothers stood out to Lele and Mimi and helped them draw closer to Jehovah.
Is it me, or is Watchtower rather cynically at this point just pursuing this strategy of filling its propaganda and filling its message with just repeated references to love? We see it in this year's convention, Love Never Fails. Love, love, love. Let's just throw in that word as many times as possible. Eventually it might stick and people might be duped into thinking that this is a loving organization just because we're saying the word love so much. The reality, of course, is so different. Mimi and Lele don't realize this now, but what's actually happened is they've gone from one bad situation to another bad situation disguised as a good situation. They've found foster parents who profess to love them and probably do love them on some level, but because these parents are Jehovah's Witnesses and everything they do, think and feel is dictated by their religion, if Mimi and Lele were to ever wake up and realize that they're being lied to and exploited by this group, the love would just evaporate instantly. Not just the love of people in their congregation, but the love of indeed their very parents, and they'd be back at square one. And quite apart from the distasteful way these girls are being exploited by Watchtower, and again their story of hardship leveraged for propaganda purposes, this testimony is really no different from any number of testimonies we've seen already on JW Broadcasting. The message is always the same. Everything outside the organization is dangerous and difficult and painful. Only in Jehovah's organization can you find love, can you find peace, can you find joy. It's all purely emotional reasoning, again intended to bypass logic. We're supposed to be impressed by the fact that these girls were convinced to become Jehovah's Witnesses basically through love bombing, by being love bombed at the Kingdom Hall, by being love bombed at the convention. They had no way of knowing that this love that was being thrown at them was entirely conditional and continues to be entirely conditional on them recognizing the authority of a bunch of guys in New York, one of whom is hosting this month's broadcasting episode. And believe it or not, he is about to lecture us as someone who believes he is one of only 8 men on the planet charged with dispensing wisdom from God, someone who believes that he will one day very soon be transferred to heaven, whereupon, after destroying everyone who doesn't agree with his authority and the authority of his colleagues, he will then assume authority over the planet to rule over all humankind. This man who has these beliefs is going to lecture us all on modesty.
One of the most underrated qualities in today's world is modesty. In fact, the world encourages the exact opposite of modesty. The world says that you are the most important person. You should promote yourself. You have no limits. You have the right to be anything you want to be. As we'll see, the world's thinking is completely backwards, and for several reasons. Really, modesty is a quality that stems from everything that is good.
Right off the bat, Kenneth Cook begins his extremely hypocritical lecture on modesty with just this barrage of nonsense. We're supposed to believe that if you are outside of the sphere of influence of Watchtower, if you are not a Jehovah's Witness, and you're just kind of going about your business as someone who is just not influenced by this religion in any way, you are going to be influenced at every turn that you are the most important person, that you should promote yourself, that you have no limits, and that you have the right to be anything you want to be. So we're all being persuaded, apparently, all of us outside of Watchtower's sphere of influence, we're all being persuaded to be narcissists, apparently. And all of this is coming from one of 8 men who believe that they alone are interpreting God's will for mankind, are sharing spiritual food guided by God's Holy Spirit. From one of 8 men who believe they have the authority to interpret what God wants, who believe that they will one day be ruling in heaven over all of humanity, and who use this organization to promote their authority. These are men who believe that they have no limits, certainly when it comes to the law. They believe and teach that if there is a conflict between their understanding of Scripture and what God wants of them and Caesar's law, that what God wants of them comes first, that their beliefs come first. And yet we're supposed to believe that in Satan's world, people are taught that there are no limits. The hypocrisy here is just stunning, and I'm afraid we've only just begun.
Notice that modesty is one of the key aspects of what is good. To help us understand why, let's discuss 3 questions. What is modesty? Why do we want to have this quality? How can we cultivate it? First, what is modesty? Basically, it's an awareness of our limitations.
It wouldn't be a JW Broadcasting episode without us all having the definition of a rudimentary word explained to us as though we're all 5-year-olds.
Of course, we often link modesty with appropriate dress and grooming. But much more is involved. How do we know? Consider what we read at Proverbs 11 and verse 2. When presumptuousness comes, dishonor will follow, but wisdom is with the modest ones. Notice that modesty is contrasted with a negative quality, presumptuousness. A presumptuous person runs ahead without the authority to do so. He or she ignores proper boundaries and limitations. That kind of attitude often leads to foolish mistakes, a bad reputation with fellow humans, and above all, it can cause a person to lose God's favor.
Of course, in describing what a presumptuous person is like, he cannot help but describe his own organization. So he says, a presumptuous person runs ahead without the authority to do so. Presumably, it's okay to run ahead if you do have the authority. So if Kenneth Cook is saying that he and his colleagues have authority from God to be God's one and only faithful slave charged with dispensing spiritual food, where is his proof? Where is his proof that he and his colleagues have authority from God? Because if they don't have authority, then this fits him. This fits the governing body. They are running ahead and passing down rule after rule, and again micromanaging people's lives without having any authority. He goes on to say that a presumptuous person or persons will ignore proper boundaries and limitations. This again describes Watchtower. They ignore their duty to protect the vulnerable, especially children. They also influence and manipulate people in areas that don't concern them. For example, telling young people that they don't get to go to college or university, telling witnesses in a hospital bed that it's better to die than to accept a blood transfusion. These are all clear manifestations of breathtaking presumptuousness, which is why it's ironic that Kenneth Cook then says that a presumptuous person will get a bad reputation with fellow humans. Go on Google and see what fellow humans have to say about the organization, about Watchtower, about Jehovah's Witnesses, about their abusive practices, about the way that the leadership imposes itself in people's private lives, even to the point of being abusive, even to the point of tearing families apart and persuading people, again, to lay down their lives as an act of loyalty to the leadership. The irony here is just astounding.
Although we don't speak of Jehovah as being modest, even he works within certain limitations that he's imposed on himself. He teaches us by example how to demonstrate this quality, even though it's not one that he needs to display. Why can we say that Jehovah imposes limitations on himself? Consider just one example. He'll never violate the gift of free will that he's granted us. Jehovah will never force us to serve him, even though, of course, he has the power to do so. Aren't we grateful that he allows us to serve him because we choose to out of love and not because we are forced to?
Jehovah never forces us to serve him, even though he has the power to do so. I'm sorry, are we describing the same religion? Are we describing the religion where witnesses believe that they will die at Armageddon if they're not witnesses? Is this the same religion? Is this the same religion where you're threatened with family estrangement if you get baptized and later change your mind? If you know anything about this religion, how can you possibly suggest that Jehovah extends free will when it's at gunpoint? When it's telling people that if they don't join a certain religion and obey the authority of this group of men who meet on Wednesdays at their lakeside compound in upstate New York, if you don't lavish them with love and respect, then you are literally worthy of death at an Armageddon that is due imminently. And all of this apparently is respecting our free will.
Are you a family head or an elder in the congregation? Or do you have another responsible position in the organization? If so, you can imitate Jehovah by not micromanaging others. Be willing to delegate tasks to them and listen to their suggestions. Imitate Jehovah's example of dignifying others and wanting to help them succeed.
Yes, don't let's be micromanaging, folks. Only Kenneth Cook and his pals are allowed to do that. Only Kenneth Cook and his pals are allowed to tell witnesses what entertainment they're allowed to watch, what clothes they're allowed to wear, whether or not they can have facial hair, whether or not they can go to college or university, what kinds of medical procedures are acceptable, which friends or family members are to be considered bad association, which customs, celebrations, or rituals are acceptable or unacceptable. No, let's leave it down to Kenneth and his pals to micromanage. Everyone else must do as the governing body says, but not as they do.
Another way that modesty promotes good relationships is that it helps us to avoid comparing ourselves to others. Comparing ourselves to others is always a dangerous road to navigate. Just think, for example, of Jesus' apostles, who argued many times over who was the greatest.
This is a brilliant example of the governing body talking out of both sides of their mouths. We have just heard Kenneth Cook say that it would be dangerous and immodest for a Jehovah's Witness to compare themselves with someone else, to compare what they're doing with what someone else is doing. We're now going to listen to some words that were spoken by another governing body member, Stephen Lett.
I am so thankful to Jehovah that positive peer pressure was put on me to enter the pioneer ministry right out of high school.
At the age of 17, when I got out of high school, there was good peer pressure put on me to pioneer. And I'm very happy that I had that pressure put on me to pioneer, because back then it was viewed as if you get out of school, you don't pioneer, something must be wrong with you. What's wrong with you, brother?
So on the one hand, you've got Kenneth Cook telling Jehovah's Witnesses that it would be dangerous of them to compare themselves with others. And on the other hand, you've got Stephen Lett encouraging the sort of thinking whereby what you're doing in terms of pioneering is dictated by what others are telling you, by others telling you that there's something wrong with you if you're not a pioneer, by others exerting positive peer pressure on you. So again, we're hearing two different messages. Kenneth Cook may expect Jehovah's Witnesses in his audience to forget about all of the many ways that they are encouraged to base their service and their worship on what other people are doing and what other people are suggesting. But those of us who know a thing or two about how this religion works really know better. In these very JW broadcasting episodes, we are routinely shown testimonies of faithful Jehovah's Witnesses, the idea being that the audience should imitate their loyalty and their steadfastness in serving Jehovah.
We can remember the good example of Moses. How did he react when Jehovah enabled some of his fellow Israelites to begin acting as prophets alongside him? Moses rejoiced, saying that he wished all of Jehovah's people were prophets. Moses didn't feel that he was the only one who should have such a privilege. Finally, modesty promotes good relationships with others because it prevents us from bragging about our accomplishments or drawing undue attention to ourselves, which could stir up resentment in others.
I don't know how Kenneth Cook can deliver this presentation with a straight face and not see the blatant irony and hypocrisy. Of course, they constantly remind everyone of how great they are and how much they've accomplished. There was a time when we didn't really know who the governing body members were. Now we see them in full HD on an almost monthly basis. We see them parading at annual meetings as though they're doing Apple launches of the latest publications or the latest initiatives. This is a group of men who loves to put themselves front center and remind everyone of how wonderful they are. And as for that part about Moses encouraging others to be prophets rather than hogging all the limelight and saying that he was the only prophet, well, how on earth does that relate to the governing body? Please tell me of an example of them suggesting that others could be used by God as God's faithful slave. Other religions may have some truth to them. Other religious leaders may be being used or guided by God's Spirit. Of course they don't say that. I'm sorry, but if you actually take the governing body and line them up against all of these things that Kenneth Cook is saying as a governing body member on the subject of modesty, they fail each and every time.
What are some other ways we can cultivate modesty? One is to apply the Bible's counsel found at 1 Corinthians 4, verse 6. Do not go beyond the things that are written. This refers primarily to the things written in God's Word. By extension, the principle also applies to the scriptural direction that we receive from our publications. When asked for advice, we would never want to impose our own opinion or simply give an answer off the top of our head. Rather, we want to direct attention to the counsel found in the Bible and Bible-based publications.
There are two things I hope you've noticed here. First of all, again, more hypocrisy, because Kenneth Cook is saying that it would be immodest for someone to go beyond the things that are written in the Bible. Well, I think we can see repeated instances in Watchtower's history and in their current teachings where they go above and beyond what the Bible says. The Bible doesn't say anything about birthdays being wrong. One classic example of terrible logic from Jehovah's Witnesses is they say, well, the Bible doesn't have anything good to say about birthdays. Whenever it mentions birthdays, someone gets beheaded or dies in some way, so that must mean birthdays are wrong. No, that just means that on the two occasions when there's a birthday, something bad happens. That is not a statement from God saying you mustn't celebrate birthdays. If we're going to go off that logic, then Jehovah's Witnesses shouldn't have dogs because the Bible doesn't have anything good to say about dogs. What we have here is just one of many examples. We could talk about beards, we could talk about masturbation, we could talk about higher education and the way witnesses are dissuaded from going to college or university. None of this has any basis in the Bible. Watchtower clearly goes above and beyond what's written in the scriptures, and yet here they are, a governing body member lecturing witnesses in this area, again virtually saying we're allowed to do it but you're not. And secondly, I hope you noticed that cute little cup and ball trick that Kenneth Cook just pulled, where he effortlessly went from talking about not going beyond the things that are written in the Bible and extended that to mean Watchtower publications. Of course, by extension, this would also include Watchtower publications. So they are shamelessly putting their literature on the same standing as God's inspired word. If that is not an example of them doing the exact thing they're warning against here, of going beyond the things that are written, I don't know what is. This is just clear and open hypocrisy at this point.
Another way we can cultivate modesty is by asking for frank comments from a trusted friend as to whether or not we have a reputation for being modest. In this regard, we remember the Bible principle, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens his friend. If someone is willing to offer kind observations about how we can improve, we wouldn't want to bristle at the comments. Granted, it may sting our pride to hear such honest feedback, but don't we all need to hear these things from time to time? As imperfect humans, each one of us has blind spots, as it were. It's hard to see ourselves the way others see us. Remember, we can work to improve our Christian personality, but only if we know the areas that could use some improvement. We can't change what we don't see.
And here we have yet another area where if you apply this counsel on modesty to the governing body fails and is therefore immodest. Because how exactly is the governing body reaching out and asking for criticism and suggestions and feedback on how they can do things better? We're talking about a group of men who repeatedly admit in the publications that they are imperfect and not infallible. Great, now you've made that admission. Where's your process for Jehovah's Witnesses to anonymously and without any fear of reprisals offer their honest feedback on what the organization's doing and how it can improve in various areas? You will find no such avenue for witnesses to appeal to. That's why on JW Survey, when I was setting up the website, I used the slogan, giving a voice to the silent majority. And I've heard that term, silent majority, used a number of times in different spheres. I think even Donald Trump may have used that phrase. But when I used it, I was talking about a literal silent majority of Jehovah's Witnesses who are silenced and who don't have a say in how their organization is run. So I set up JW Survey as a way of giving witnesses and former witnesses an opportunity to have their say. Let's hear what the honest reaction is to all these teachings and policies. You simply will not see any willingness from Kenneth Cook or any of his chums on the governing body to do any such thing to in any way canvass the opinions of those whose lives he has control over. All they're interested in is controlling people, is having power over them. They are not open in any way to any kind of feedback, including constructive feedback. So again, by their own criteria of what does or doesn't constitute a modest person, the governing body fails.
Modesty can also protect us from Satan's schemes. In this dramatization, a brother's modesty helped him to make the right decision.
Mum's been working hard lately, but I wish she worked harder for Jehovah. I try to help out where I can. Oh, by the way, I'm Jin. Every day starts the same. I grab a drink of water. I say hi to Jun. He's in my congregation. And then there's Mi Kyung. Okay, here we go. I say hello. She says something clever. I try to leave. So, this is different. She's having trouble in math and needs my help. I don't want to be rude, but if I help her with her homework, how far could the relationship develop? How do you say no to a girl like her?
You say no to a girl like her very easily if you're not interested. And if you're not interested in a girl or a boy making advances toward you, and they continue to make those advances, we then enter the realm of sexual harassment. But I don't think that's what's happening here. I think that Jin likes Mi Kyung. I think that these are two young people who like each other, and the only reason why Jin feels tormented and feels as though he can't pursue a relationship with this girl is because he is forbidden from doing so by his religion. Let me spell out for you what sexual repression means for young Jehovah's Witnesses. You're not allowed to date someone who's not a believer. You are not allowed to have sex with someone unless you're married to them. So this leads to lots of young Jehovah's Witnesses getting married just so they can have sex. You're certainly not allowed to be gay or lesbian or transgender. And you are not even allowed, having all of these other restrictions weighing down on you, you're not even allowed to masturbate. So this is the environment in which young Jehovah's Witnesses are forced to operate, and we're here seeing how this would play out in a school setting where again you have these two young people who like each other, but one is forbidden from pursuing a relationship he apparently would otherwise pursue purely because of restrictions being placed on him by his religion.
Why can't I get it out of my head? Things are always better when Uncle and Auntie are around. Even Mum makes sure she's home for dinner and broadcast night. Uncle wants to work together in service this weekend. Maybe that will help clear my head. Jehovah must be disappointed in me.
Laced in this story are a number of clues as to just how controlled life is as a Jehovah's Witness. So you have the family gathering to watch JW Broadcasting episodes. In this case, Jin's mother apparently isn't so interested in the religion, or at least from Jin's point of view, could be doing more. So he's apparently dependent on his aunt and uncle, who are apparently more involved in the religion. And we now see him turning to his uncle for advice on how to deal with this relationship that he truthfully wants but knows he can't have.
I couldn't take it anymore. It was difficult, but I told Uncle everything. I felt guilty that I knew I shouldn't, but I liked the attention. We read Genesis 39, 7 through 12. I knew the account about Potiphar's wife, but he mentioned something I hadn't thought of before. He told Potiphar's wife, how could I commit this great badness and actually sin against God? But why did Joseph have to flee? Joseph fought her every day, but she wasn't going to give up. In her mind, it wasn't a question of if, but when. There came a point where he had to flee. I explained why I was ending the relationship, but she would not give up. You know the last thing she said to me? That I was a coward. But she's wrong. You're never a coward if you run to Jehovah.
Our young brother saw that dating an unbeliever would put him in harm's way. He was reminded that getting involved with someone who doesn't share Jehovah's values could eventually lead to sin. Having modesty protected him from such dire consequences.
And that's what this was all about to begin with. The fact that this girl, Mi-kyung, didn't share Jin's beliefs. And don't get me wrong, it wouldn't have been plain sailing even if it just so happened that she too were a Jehovah's Witness. They would still have been considered probably too young to start dating openly, and they would have had to wait for some time, most likely, until they could start dating and have the approval of the congregation and their families, etc. But make no mistake, the real issue here for Watchtower is the fact that it doesn't want Jehovah's Witnesses, young Jehovah's Witnesses, entering into romantic relationships of any kind with quote-unquote worldly people. This is all about control and making sure there are as few distractions and as few temptations as possible. Bottom line, Watchtower's interests, or the interests of the Jehovah's Witness leadership, come ahead of the interests and the relationships and the feelings and the passions of their followers, of ordinary Jehovah's Witnesses. This propaganda affected me growing up, even purely in the form of books and magazine articles that were micromanaging my life, telling me who I was allowed to have relationships with, telling me what I was and wasn't allowed to do with my own body. And this restriction and this control and this repression has a really profound effect on people growing up. These are dark forces for any group to be playing with. You do not tamper with someone's sexuality and control them in that area, that deeply intimate area of their life, without it having a profound emotional and psychological effect on them moving forward in later years.
Welcome to the world headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses at Warwick, New York. As Jehovah's people, we are multicultural and multilingual. And as the artwork here emphasizes, our focus is on our commission to preach the good news to people of all nations.
So those of you who have seen my YouTube documentary about visiting Warwick back in 2017 will understand that it was a strange experience watching this sort of virtual tour of the facilities introduced by Mark Sanderson, seemingly with the intention of attracting more Jehovah's Witnesses to go visit. I don't know whether any of you have yet seen the video that's been posted on Genetically Modified Skeptics channel, where he and Telltale attempt to go visit Warwick. Obviously, Telltale is, like myself, a former witness. Genetically Modified Skeptic is not a former witness, but he does have some background with fundamentalist Christianity. Anyway, they turn up with a film crew, and it seems that in the 2 years since I visited, the security arrangements have been modified, let's put it that way. They had a much tougher time trying to get any filming done, both at Warwick, and I believe they also tried visiting, was it Wallkill, or maybe it was Patterson? Anyway, they went to another one of the facilities and had the same problem. In fact, they couldn't even get into the other facility. So Watchtower was clearly improving the security. So this kind of tour that Mark Sanderson is suggesting or inviting people on, you're pretty much invited to go on this tour if you are either a believing Jehovah's Witness or someone who has no intention whatsoever of being remotely critical of the organization. If you try going to the headquarters to document the experience in such a way that will in any way put the organization in any kind of negative light, you will not be welcome at any of the Watchtower facilities in upstate New York. So let's make that clear. I did find it interesting, though, where Mark Sanderson boasted about Jehovah's Witnesses being multicultural and multilingual. Well, let's start off with multilingual. If you are a worldwide organization, it's not the biggest thing to aspire to be multilingual. You're going to have to be multilingual. You're going to have at least more than one language in your religion. So that's not a huge boast to be making. If your aims are global, then you should of course be a multilingual organization. As for multicultural, Jehovah's Witnesses are multicultural to the extent that a culture doesn't conflict with Jehovah's Witness teachings. If any aspect of a culture, and let's not forget that religion plays a part in people's culture, if there's any aspect of someone's culture that conflicts with what Jehovah's Witnesses are expected to do, say, and think, they are to erase those elements of culture. So the whole boast about being multicultural definitely comes with strings attached.
What are we doing today as an organization? How did we get here? And what's our main tool for this great work? We invite you to come tour our museums to find out. We have 3 museums here at Warwick, all funded by voluntary donations. Each of them is alive with stories. Upstairs on the 2nd floor is the museum Faith in Action. There we'll see the very latest on what's being done by Jehovah's organization. Also on the 2nd floor is the museum A People for Jehovah's Name. It takes us on an exciting journey back in time.
So my take on the experience of touring Warwick's museums is obviously less glowing than Mark Sanderson's. I will say this, the Faith in Action, it's described there as a museum. It's nothing like a museum. It's more like a presentation of the kind you would find at a trade fair, where you have just panels of information. You're essentially being shown what amounts to pages on a website. It really isn't a remotely engaging experience, the Faith in Action exhibit. I did find the People for Jehovah's Name exhibit interesting, if only because there were lots of older items for Watchtower nerds like me to geek out over. And again, if you see the documentary, you'll know what I mean. I went with a friend of mine called Peter Yike, who is a former Bible student, so he understood the whole kind of Charles Taze Russell history, and we both found a lot of the older materials that were on display very interesting. But what spoiled that part of the tour is that they were giving, as you would expect, a very whitewashed interpretation of their history that in places was just downright wrong, just downright misleading. So that was kind of a bittersweet experience. The Divine Name exhibit on the bottom floor was just, I'm sorry, it was just dull. You just walk around in a big kind of U shape looking at old Bibles, which Watchtower is trying to suggest prove that they are right to use the name Jehovah, even though scholars point to Yahweh as being a far more appropriate way of referring to the Almighty. In fact, Jehovah, if you look into it, only dates back to, I think, the 13th century. It was invented by a Dominican monk named Raymundus Martini. In case you're interested, it actually says that in the Aid to Understanding book. But clearly Watchtower isn't going to be transparent about all that at their museum, at their headquarters. They have a very clear narrative of what they want to be showing visitors. And again, if you're going there for any purpose other than to drool over what's on display, to have your faith strengthened, to be supportive of the organization, you are not going to be welcome at these facilities.
This is the Show Love Gallery. Here you'll learn how the governing body helps God's people to have love among themselves, as Jesus commanded at John 13:35.
More talk about love. It's literally as though the teaching committee or the writing committee, whoever's coming up with this, they've had this meeting where they've just said, listen guys, we just need to insert the word love as many times as possible. If we say it enough, maybe we'll convince people that our organization is loving. Maybe we'll persuade people to forget about the fact that if you don't attend all the meetings or you don't put your time in on the ministry, you will be classed as bad association and subjected to preemptive shunning. Maybe they'll forget about the fact that we break apart families by ordering believing family members not to have anything to do with their disfellowshipped loved ones. If we just put the words show love in big block letters in one of our museum exhibits, maybe that will make us a loving religion.
This is the Meet Together Gallery. Here you'll learn how the governing body is helping God's people to meet together, to incite to love and fine works, as directed at Hebrews 10:24 and 25. How is the headquarters staff at Warwick filling that need? Because we keep growing, there is an ongoing need to build new kingdom halls and to renovate existing ones. The publishing committee of the governing body directs where kingdom halls will be built and makes funds available to the branches.
This part was interesting, and by the way, I've dramatically shortened this particular segment in the JW Broadcasting episode because for the most part it's just extremely tedious, but I did find it fascinating to hear Mark Sanderson talking about all this growth. Because we keep growing, we need to keep building kingdom halls. First of all, you call 1.4% a year for the last 2 years growth? That's just barely keeping your head above water. And the growth certainly isn't happening in countries where there is internet. In fact, as I've already pointed out, nearly half of Europe is actually in decline. So where's the growth happening there? Even in countries where there is modest growth or where Watchtower is just about keeping its head above water, we hear anecdotal evidence of half-empty kingdom halls. We hear about kingdom halls being sold. We hear about congregations being shut down or merged. It's clear that there isn't just this amazing growth going on that requires there to be all of this construction in terms of kingdom halls. Again, if you've seen my Unrighteous Riches video, you'll know that Watchtower's strategy is in fact very different. They know, well, first of all, they need money, and they know that a quick way of getting money is to liquidate some of the many millions of dollars they have currently tied up in property, and they're doing that by selling kingdom halls that local witnesses have been persuaded to believe are their responsibility to pay for the construction of and to pay for the upkeep of. And Watchtower ignores all of that and just sends a letter to the body of elders instructing them that their kingdom hall is going to be sold, so now you need to go and travel an extra 30-40 minutes to this other kingdom hall in the next town. So even in something as relatively straightforward as a virtual tour of their headquarters, the governing body just cannot help but entirely misrepresent things and give a false spin on what's really happening.
At times, though, our religious freedom is opposed by secular authorities. So the Coordinators Committee supervises the World Headquarters Legal Department. Many courts have handed down favorable decisions. Still, we must continue to defend our right to preach the good news.
So we there have Mark Sanderson saying, many courts have handed down favorable decisions. Well, when are you going to tell us, Mark, about the courts that don't hand down favorable decisions, especially when it comes to child safeguarding, especially when it comes to Watchtower's duty to report abuse? When are you going to talk to us about that? Oh, are you only going to tell us about the positives, about the areas in which the legal department is successful? And when are you going to tell witnesses, Mark Sanderson, about what Watchtower's currently doing in the United States Supreme Court, where they are literally petitioning America for the right to keep secret records of molesters? If you haven't yet seen episode 25 of Watchtower in Focus, which is actually the most recent upload on this channel, where we talk about this, you need to check that out, because Watchtower, in my opinion, is completely going against the promises it made in the May 2019 Watchtower, where it promised witnesses that it does everything it can to protect children. It promised witnesses that it will not shirk from reporting accused molesters to the authorities, and yet at the same time, literally at the same time, they're petitioning the United States Supreme Court for their perceived right under the Constitution to keep secret records that never see the light of day, that never get passed on to the police. This is a shamelessly deceitful and lying organization. But hey, if you want to go and tour their headquarters, be my guest.
There are many areas in Mozambique that do not have internet access, and in some parts, there is no cell phone coverage.
So we started investigating what it would take to have a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week satellite channel dedicated to JW broadcasting.
When the announcement was made to our congregation about the JW satellite channel, our brothers and sisters were very happy about the announcement.
Our organization has a lot of experience distributing video via the internet, but to distribute it on a satellite was entirely new, so we had to do a lot of research.
We don't have our own satellite up in space. We ran a channel on a satellite that covers sub-Saharan Africa.
What is required from the brothers is to have a satellite dish and a decoder. This will allow them to view the channel with no additional cost.
So the brothers would either come to the branch or at an RTO or at Literature Depot to receive the dish.
The governing body lovingly approved for the rental cost of the satellite channel to be covered from contributions to the worldwide work. So there's no expense to the brothers in Africa to receive the programs. We hope and pray that access to the JW satellite feed becomes available to as many of our brothers and sisters as possible in sub-Saharan Africa.
How loving of the governing body to not expect witnesses in Africa to pay for a system that is exploiting their ignorance and exploiting their inability to access objective information about their religion online because there's no internet. How loving of the governing body when they had that meeting to say, you know what, we'll cover that expense. We're not going to expect witnesses in these lands to pay to be manipulated, to pay to be exploited. How loving of them. This is apparently something the governing body deserves a medal for. Honestly, it's so sickening to see people in this part of the world, and make no mistake, this is where the modest growth is coming from. When we talk about there being 1.4% growth in the organisation for the last 2 years, it's in countries like this where you see most of the growth, because there's no way of pushing back on Watchtower's narrative. Watchtower relies on a vacuum of criticism to get their message across. And that's exactly what they have in countries where there is virtually no internet or limited mobile phone coverage. And to add insult to injury, here we see the governing body celebrating their ability to manipulate potentially millions of people who are already experiencing varying degrees of hardship into dropping everything and following them, even though, as we saw in the case of Mexico and Malawi, they are quite happy to throw their followers under the bus if it suits their aims and their objectives.
Mapudungun means the speech of my land. It's a beautiful and expressive language, and it's the language of my heart. When I was 12 years old, I went to live with my grandfather and my uncle's family so I could study at a nearby school. My cousin spoke Mapudungun a lot, which made me really happy. When I saw that some of my classmates didn't understand their schoolwork, especially in math class, I would try to help them out. That's when I started to think about becoming a math teacher, so I could really help others. But the head teacher told me that because I was speaking Mapudungun and because I was helping my classmates, she was going to lower my grades. When my father saw my grades, he was furious. He accused me of being lazy and not studying. He withdrew me from school, and I went back home to Tromen. My dream of becoming a teacher was shattered. Because my dad had suffered so much as a victim of discrimination, he told us we were not to speak Mapudungun. When I think about everything that happened, it makes me very sad.
I've watched this segment 2 or 3 times now, and I'm still struggling to understand the relevance of this man's story, aside from Watchtower's use of it to manipulate people with emotional reasoning. We just saw there in the last few seconds the guy getting all emotional on camera, and it's hard to find a JW Broadcasting episode these days where you don't have someone welling up, because when Watchtower can show someone getting all emotional, then witnesses are compelled by the story and will find it persuasive regardless of whether there's any kind of logical coherence to what's being said. But when you actually analyze the story, there isn't really anything interesting or relevant about what's happening. We have a man who suffers discrimination as a child. Due to speaking his native language, he is put at a disadvantage. This causes him resentment. Well, what does that have to do with Watchtower being God's one and only true religion? The fact that there is injustice in the world and discrimination in the world. There is injustice and discrimination inside Jehovah's organization. When you look at the many areas in which it's abusing people, the fact that this guy had a tough time as a child and his teacher was discriminatory towards him, that doesn't make his religion true.
On our way back, I was deep in thought, praying to Jehovah about how to help the Mapuche people. Many years passed before I saw an answer to my prayers. Then one day after the meeting, I received an invitation to be a speaker at the First Assembly to include talks in Mapudungun. but I didn't want to accept the assignment. I felt worthless because of all the discrimination I had endured. So I prayed again and again to Jehovah and began to meditate a lot. Jehovah was now giving me an answer to my prayers. He sees our true value.
Here is this guy's story, summarized as far as I can tell. Young man grows up in South American country and is discriminated for using his native language by his teacher. Then this person becomes a Jehovah's Witness and gradually starts to use this language in his preaching. And then he receives a letter inviting him to give a talk in this language at the first meeting where this language is going to be used. And he at first feels reticent to accept the invitation because he feels unworthy due to the discrimination he received when he was young. But he prays about it and decides he'll go ahead and give the talk. That's the story. How does this merit this big reenactment involving actors portraying different parts of the story? There's nothing happening of any interest. And we saw the same thing, we're seeing the same thing in this year's Love Never Fails convention, where there was a reenactment of a missionary who was going to some country, and she was nervous about the fact, or anxious, that there would be no one to greet her at the airport. This was the big story that she had to tell, and Watchtower went to all the trouble of reenacting it with an actress in 70s clothes and everything, just showing this woman feeling uncertain about whether anyone would collect her at the airport. I'm sorry, there's no other way to say this. Watchtower is scraping the bottom of the barrel with some of these stories.
Please enjoy the music video for this month, entitled Be Courageous and Strong.
It's dark outside to start the day. She humbly starts to pray for her kids at school and their brotherhood. Father, help us be faithful when things make it hard to go. She never thinks of losing hope, never stops being kind in that song. It's always on her mind. I will make you strong. Do not be afraid. I will be with you. I will be your aid. Be courageous and strong. It's her favorite song. And he will make you firm. And he will make you strong.
This, for me, is one of the most bizarre music videos ever to be shown on JW Broadcasting. Only now, kind of watching it a second time, having already seen it in preparation, only now is it starting to dawn on me what this story is about. I was first kind of flummoxed when she showed the picture of the tree, and then they start ferreting around in a drawer, and now I've realised, having seen the whole thing, what the significance of all that is. Apparently, this single mother is raising this family in this South American country. They're a poor family. She supports the family by making bread, which she then goes to sell at the market. But before she sets off to the market, she's telling her children to colour in this poster of this picture of the tree, which is part of materials that Watchtower has made available to download so that parents can indoctrinate their children to be Jehovah's Witnesses. So it's these materials that she wants her children to colour in, but they're looking in the drawer and the boy points to the fact that there's virtually no crayons left, so he can't colour in the picture. So I kid you not. The mother then resolves that she will go to the market and she will sell bread, and with some of the proceeds, she will pick up some crayons so that her son can colour in the picture. But while she's at the market, or when she's coming home from the market, she gets set upon by some thugs who rob her and steal her money, but at least she has her crayons still. So when she gets home, we see the boy completing the picture and everything's okay, because at least they can continue serving Jehovah together. As far as I can tell, that's the story of what we're seeing, and you'd have to watch the whole thing. It's very bizarre. This material apparently will be encouraging and faith-strengthening to witnesses. But that's everything from this month's JW Broadcasting episode. I think more than anything, I'm still reeling from the absolute hypocrisy that we saw on display with Kenneth Cook. This modest man, according to current Jehovah's Witness teachings, will very soon be raptured to heaven so that he can participate in destroying anyone who doesn't agree with him and his pals. This apparently is modesty, and we are all supposed to be lectured by such a modest person. Honestly, you just couldn't script it, could you? But again, that's more or less everything. I now need to turn my attention to finishing my rebuttals to the Love Never Fails convention. Actually, there's just one more rebuttal. I need to look into the Josiah drama and give my thoughts on what I consider to be some very disturbing material that witnesses are being shown. And there is also the August JW Broadcasting episode, which I plan on sharing my thoughts on before the end of August. So I have my work cut out, but I do hope you found my thoughts interesting on this material. Don't forget to subscribe to the John Cedars channel for similar videos, and as always, thank you so much for watching.